Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for September 11th, 2018. Continuing our exploration of the Best Picture winners. We're up to the 1932 winner, Grand Hotel. This is the weirdest, in terms of the other awards this film won / was nominated for. This is the weirdest one. It was only nominated for one Oscar, which was Best Picture. It's one Best Picture. Some of that has to do with there wasn't a supporting acting category at this time, and so because of that, there's no real lead in this film because it's a Altman-esque interlocking ensemble piece where there is 6 stories or so going on, and all the there's no true lead character. There's multiple protagonists. It's basically the 3 main characters are Ringoline, who's played wonderfully by Lyon Barrymore, and then the Baron by John Barrymore, and then Pricing, who's the heavy. It's those 3 guys. They're all equally important. I really like this movie a lot because it's very Altman-esque. Robert Altman, he's my favorite director. And even though it's a really early example of a ensemble interlocking story, it has a lot of good unity. Because, okay, so movies like this, where there's not really one story, but multiple interlocking stories that play off of each other, there's a tendency for these films to feel like not unified, like not a single entity, but a series of vignettes or a series of short films strung together. And Grand Hotel doesn't feel like that. It feels very unified, and I think it's largely because each of the stories sort of represents a stage in life, because you have birth, death, because like the Porter story is about birth, then you have like a wedding, and then you have flirtation, you have death, you have career, etc. And it's all sort of well put together in that way. And so it's a really interesting movie. It's a little bit like Broadway Melody, but good, where it's a fairly primitive example of the genre, but it's really interesting to see how the sort of the precursors to stuff like Nashville or Shortcuts. It's a little bit more melodramatic than you would necessarily see today. It's certainly more melodramatic than Altman, because there's a clear heavy in Pricing, and then there is sort of too many pat resolutions, like Joan Crawford, the stenographer, character who's sort of a conniving gold digger-esque character. She's kind of given to Ringoline, and their stories just wrap up too nicely, and everything like that. With that being said, and then the Baron story, it's never really clear why he just doesn't take the pearls from the ballerina. But with all that being said, it's a really cool film, an example of this type of film. I really, really like it, this ensemble, interlocking stories. It is much more fantasia than realistic. And I really do like that how the Grand Hotel is sort of a microcosm for the society. And I guess let me bring up some the trailer and the clips to talk about the actual films. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we're going to start with the trailer. Obviously, in a movie like this, the main sort of attraction is the acting. And it's true that all the actors in this were the most popular stars at the time. Probably Greta Garbo is probably the most famous. And she, of course, she has that great line. She was a very recluse, in real life, she was a very reclusive, private individual. She has that great line, I just want to be alone, or I want to be alone. and it really sort of connects her to her character, and that's probably the most famous moment in the film. I gotta say, the Baron and Ballerina story is probably the weakest because they fall in love pretty much right off the bat, and it doesn't feel very realistic. I mean, I realize it's mostly a marriage of convenience, and there's kind of implication that maybe he's lying to her, and she's very, very desperate. But in any case, it's not all that believable. It's that's probably the place where it goes the most melodramatic. John Barrymore is really good as the Baron, though. The pricing story is mostly good. I really like the actor who plays the pricing. He's a good heavy. He's a good villain. Joan Crawford probably gives the best female performance in this film because she's very, very conniving, and she has a deep sophistication to her. However, for my money, the best part of this film is Larry Barrymore as Kringeline, Otto Kringeline. There's something very, very liberating because he's a clerk who's dying, and so he's no longer being threatened. There's something just very, very liberating about that character and that performance. And, you know, he's such a cool character, and he really stays with you. Anyway, so this is I'm going to show the opening scene and the last scene in the movie. And the opening scene, because this movie is all about connections and how different stories connect to each other. So I really like that the first thing you see is a switchboard connecting people, and then you have all the various stories. So this is the porter, his wife is, this scene is just the initiating event for each story. His wife is in the hospital, and all of these conversations are taking place at the same time. You can tell because the background keeps changing, but at the same time, they're all different stories, but they're all sort of the same story because the initiating event is a phone conversation, and they're all basically framed the same way. Phone in the foreground, back, reframed in the back. Behind the actor, that's Kringeline. He's talking about the fact he's dying. And then, I like the rhythm of the scene, how it keeps cutting back and forth between all the various story threads, and it kind of gives the connection. I mean, it sets up each of the stories economically because the entire dynamics of each character are set up through these conversations, and with that, but also the way in which they connect and play off each other. Because, for example, Kringeline pricing is his boss, so you kind of already get the sense that Kringeline's story is going to be impacted by this guy. And his story is his company's merging, and he has this deal that he's going to eventually lie about because, again, he's the heavy, he's the villain. And again, you kind of already get the sense of, you know, their positions in life just because how they're standing. Like, you can tell he's a prim and proper man because he's standing tall, erect, where you can tell Kringeline actually is past the point of giving a fuck because he's all slouched down and his collar's out, etc. And I really like how the rhythm of these scenes, because they begin with like a long scene for each individual setting up their story, and then it starts getting faster and faster. So this woman is the helper of the premier ballerina, who was Carbo, and she's all about being flighty and isolated. So her story is she wants to be alone, and that she's not seen for her initiating event is there. And then this is the Baron, and the Baron's story is all about how he needs to get money. And so again, it's just going to cut back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it gives all this overlapping interconnectedness a great sense of feel. And then because they're on a telephone, and the first shot you see was a switchboard, it really does give a sense of these being independent stories, and then they're getting connected through the Grand Hotel, the switchboard, which is a really cool thing. And then it cuts to this guy who's the doctor, and he's like, Grand Hotel, nothing ever changes because it's supposed to be the life. Okay, so anyway, at the end, Pricing murders the Baron because he was trying to steal. The Baron was trying to steal from Pricing, and so this, the last scene, where again it's sort of the inverse of the first scene, where instead of just having everything isolated, you're going to see every guest leave the hotel, and it's basically sort of the same shot. So this is the body of the Baron leaving the hotel, and he's going to drive off. So we have a sense that, again, if the hotel is life, this is people exiting life, and that's the Baron leaving first. The Baron's body leaving first gives that impression. Okay, and then this is going to be Pricing, because he killed him. So he's arrested, and it's sort of this shot. He's given the least amount of dignity. His shot is the least personable because the camera's so far back, and he just very quickly marches out. So you can tell that his fate is sealed, and he's a villain. He's sort of isolated from the rest of society at this point because he has killed a man, etc. Okay, and it's immediately sort of juxtaposed with this dog, who is the Baron's dog, leaving as well, and the dog is treated a little bit more humanized more than the villain. You kind of get the sense that the director is feeling bad for the dog because of this. And then this is the ballerina, and she fell in love with the Baron, so she's looking for him. So her shot is all very frantic and close up, and she's going to come back to the office. So again, each step of the way, there's sort of connection. So like the Pricing shot is far away, but then the dog is sort of medium, and her is even closer, and she goes back to the desk until you get to Kringeline and Fredgen, who's the stenographer, exiting, which is going to be right here next. So again, you kind of have the inverse of the opening, where each of the stories are started and they're being connected through the telephone. Here they're being connected, ending, resolving, because they're all exiting the hotel. And then these two, because the scenes also start, like in the beginning, the shots get shorter and shorter and shorter. Here the shots get longer and longer and longer. So until you get to not quite here, because this is a couple who just got married, coming in to the hotel to bring in the marriage, which is a life change. Right here, this shot is the longest of all the exiting shots. It's almost a minute and a half, I think. So again, at the beginning, the cuts get faster and faster and faster, where here at the end, the exiting shots get longer and longer and longer, and then the porter's wife ends up having a kid, which again, it cuts from the marriage to the kid, connecting stages of life together. So in the end, I really, really like this movie. It's a really interesting example of the genre. It's a little bit too fantastical in its writing, and some of the story beats is a little bit over the top and more poorly motivated. Like Pricing killing the Baron is not that well thought out, or it's not really that well motivated, even though he's the heavy. And then Fretchen and Kringeline getting together feels a little bit forced to me. But that's kind of part and parcel for these movies, because you're dealing with so many characters. Things are often done in shorthand when it comes to it. And while Altman, to go back to the reference, got much, much better in this form by keeping the shorthand more believable and more realistic. Here it's a little bit forgivable, because again, a little bit like Broadway Melodies, this is such an early example of the form, and it's just interesting to see the various techniques developing. Anyway, just to wrap this up, like at the beginning, there's the symmetry. He's going to cut back to the doctor, and he's like, People come, people go, nothing ever changes because life is the hotel and life never ever changes. So that's going to be pretty much it for today. Cubs and Culture out. Have a good day. Grand Hotel. See you. 1932.